Hey everybody at home at Old Guy Hi-Fi channel. I hope everyone's doing well today. Today should be a fun video. We're going to take a look at the Gustard U18 DDC reclocker USB interface. So sit back, relax, and we'll get going on this review. Well, before we get started, big shout out to Yoshida Electronics for providing this unit to me for review. There will be a link to the product page for this on their website in the pinned comment and in the video description. It is not an affiliate link. So what is the Gustard U18? Well, it is a $500 USB interface, also known as a DDC reclocker. And basically what it does is it takes a USB signal in from your PC and or streamer device if it has USB input. It takes that USB and it can convert it to a number of different formats. We'll talk about it. So if we come in on USB and we go out on any of the SPDIF connections, because SPDIF is limited because of the bandwidth of the actual connection. So it was, remember, I was designed back in the early 80s, Sony Philips Digital Interface. That's what SPDIF stands for. You can only do 24-bit 192. But if you go out, and this has got an I2S output, you can do 32-bit 768 and DSD 512. The other thing this can do, and we're going to take a look at the front, the back, and the inside and all that other stuff. The other thing this can do is take an external clock input and retime, so it's obviously using a very high quality, very accurate timing system clock, and it can output that clock signal to your DAC, or it's got a good internal clock that can output an external clock signal to your DAC. So what do DDCs do? Well, the DDC acts as a bridge between a computer and a DAC. Anything that's got a USB output that you're streaming music from. It converts those USB signals to other digital formats. So let's say you have a DAC. It's not uncommon. A lot of people have Gishelli DACs that don't have a USB input. Well, this can convert a USB input into this and output it on ASEBU, on Toslink, or on coax SPDIF. So it can do that. It also improves the clocking. And the way I like to kind of describe this is, we all rinse our dishes before we put them in the dishwasher, if we're fortunate enough to have a dishwasher. But we always rinse our dishes because you want to get that caked on, gritty, hard to get off stuff. You want to get it kind of clean before you put it in the dishwasher, because then the dishwasher has an easier job of really getting your dishes squeaky clean and sanitized. This is the rinse before the dishwasher, the DAC being the dishwasher. So improved clock. This can reduce jitter and absolutely send a super clean signal to the DAC. It isolates the USB source from the DAC itself. So now we're galvanically and electronically isolated from that USB. Don't for 1 minute think USB is not noise, is noise free. It is not. It is loaded with jitter, it's loaded with noise. The good thing about USB is, and it's why it's our best connection currently, is the receiving device, the clock in here determines the clock of everything, but it can ask for a resend of missing or corrupted packets, so it's asynchronous. Its communication goes both ways. That's why USB is really good. So again, but USB can be super unbelievably noisy. This galvanically and electrically isolates your DAC from that USB noise. Greatly reduces the noise floor and yields big benefits in sound quality. Like I said, from a compatibility standpoint, I can convert a USB signal into any one of the 3 SPDIF outputs, and now I can connect to a DAC that may not have a USB input. So it just makes it that much more easy to use and live with and compatible, so you can use it with a wider variety of products. Also, sound quality-wise, there's no question that with better signal integrity and better timing, a DDC can actually provide the DAC a much cleaner signal, and you get a much cleaner, more refined sound out of it. So let's do this. Let's take a look at the front. Let's take a look at the back. We're going to open it up and look inside, and I think you'll be impressed, because I certainly was. And we'll come back and again continue the nerd fest on what DDCs do. Okay, here we are looking at the front panel of the Gustard U18. Now the power switch is on the back by the power cable, so we're going to go ahead and turn that on. There's not a ton to see. I'm going to kind of zoom in on this area, so let me reconfigure. Okay, here we are looking at the front panel. Not a lot of information available. There's not a lot of functions for this. It shows the input being PCM. That would display DSD if it was DSD. Shows the sample rate. If we were oversampling, it would show that. It shows the reference. Now, reference refers to which clock it's using. Right now, it's set for the internal clock. So if I push that button, that'll look for an external clock, but it's shows an error code because it can't find one. And then this button is just actually the configuration for I2S. So you'll see mode 2, mode 3, mode 4, Gustard mode, which is mode 1, and that is basically the PS Audio pin configuration. I have not ever had an issue with any of the devices I've plugged into this handshaking with it. So leave it in the standard Gustard mode for probably 90% of everything. But in the owner's manual, it does show you all the pin configurations if you were to need to change it. And there's also a jumper inside the unit, but I don't think you really need to touch that. So anyway, that's the front panel. Let's take a look at the back. All right, well, here we are at the back of the U18. Again, a real simple layout. Power switch, IC power socket, universal voltage switch, USB-B input, 10 megahertz clock input. We have a 10 megahertz clock output. I2S out, single-ended out, balanced out, and SPDIF optical out. So really interesting piece. So we can use the internal clock to reclock a DAC, or we can pass through the external clock signal out to the DAC to help it retime. So this is a pretty comprehensive piece. So let's do this. Let's open it up, look inside, and then I'll tell you what I thought of it. Well, here we are looking at the inside of the Gustard U18. I don't know if you can see it. That's a Nichicon fine gold capacitor. It's very good. Also in there, and that's the power supply section, is an LT3045 high performance low dropout line regulator that has very low noise from 10 hertz to 100,000 hertz. So over here we've got an XMOS XU216 USB audio processor. It uses 16 real-time cores, and it handles the USB audio input and can support sample rates up to 32-bit 768, DSD 512. It offers very low latency, very low, very good jitter performance. It supports asynchronous USB audio with precise clocking, and its parallel processing cores will allow for precise timing, some custom DSP features, and a stable data transfer. Now over here is the FPGA. Now the FPGA is interesting in that it handles kind of more complex high-speed data processing, such as digital signal conditioning and or reclocking, which this does do. It also can handle oversampling, buffering, and or error correction. So these two work hand in hand. And then you have the Gustard oscillator clock. That actually is in its own oven-controlled container, so it is temperature regulated for best performance. And then each of the AccuSilicon AS338 oscillators are sealed in a nitrogen environment inside there. So really well laid out. You'll see some little red things. Those are WEMA capacitors. This thing's really impressive. I was very impressed with it. So let me do this. Let me button this back up, and then I'm going to tell you how I used it and what I thought of the results of it. Well, as you saw when we looked inside, it's an impressive unit. I mean, it uses both an XMOS processor and an FPGA, and we'll talk about the fact that you can use two of those together, although some, and you've seen some of them from me, the little entry-level DDC reclockers like the SMSL or the Duke unit, they just use an XMOS processor. They don't have an FPGA, but they're very low cost, and FPGAs require programming and a lot of other things to make them work. So obviously it's cost prohibitive for that type of product. But the key thing is those AccuSilicon AS338 oscillator clocks, they're in their own hermetically sealed nitrogen environment. And that means it is 100% isolated. It's very clean. It's very stable. It has very low phase noise. That's how you measure. That's the specification that they talk about with oscillator clocks is phased noise. Also, too, you have that the Gustard oscillator in its own oven-controlled container. That's really, really cool. You also have a great power supply. It is a full linear power supply. I couldn't show it. I'll insert a picture of it, but there is a big toroid in there, and it is fully regulated, fully linear. Really good, clean power supply. You know, it uses an LT3045 low dropout line regulator for managing all of that digital and all of that other stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and put a different script up in front of me here so I can keep going through this, but I want to talk about FPGAs, I want to talk about XMOS, I want to talk about jitter reduction, and I want to talk about all of that other stuff, which tends to be a little bit controversial. So hang on a second while I reconfigure. So the U18 uses an XMOS U216 XMOS processor, and it is primarily a USB audio processor, because remember, we also have a FPGA in this, and the two are working together, and I'll talk about how that happens. So the XMOS processor can accept an incoming USB signal anywhere from 1644 all the way up to 32-bit 768. It's not actually doing the oversampling. So let's say you're streaming a high-res file and it comes up 24,192. Well, it can take that incoming PCM signal without any modifications, without any messing around with it, and it can start the processing sequence on it natively. So that's important. The XMOS processor offers really low latency and very good jitter performance because again, that incoming USB signal is full of jitter, full of noise, full of all kinds of electrical stuff going on from your PC or your streamer is carried over that USB. It supports asynchronous USB audio. Now so USB is probably our best connection for a couple reasons. One is it's not because it's low noise. It isn't. The primary reason is because it's asynchronous. So if the XMOS processor in this detects that there is missing information, it can ask for a resend and it can of that packet of information, and it can do a reconstruction. And so what happens is there actually, and I don't know that I pointed it out, but there is a buffer, a WinBond buffer chip on the board that can take and it'll hold a lot of information, and it'll buffer it while the processor's comparing and looking and making sure that everything is error-free before it sends it down the chain further. So, excuse me, that's a very important thing. Also, its parallel processing cores allow for good, precise timing. You can add some custom DSP features, some noise shaping, some noise reduction, and it really, what it's doing is providing a very stable data transfer through the rest of the USB interface DDC reclocker. It also uses what's called a CPLD, or a complex programmable logic device, and it's kind of like an FPGA, sort of. It's designed for high-speed digital signal processing and control tasks. So the U18 uses a CPLD made by Lattice, which is a fairly well-known chip manufacturer. And if you guys saw the review of the Gustard X26 Model 3, I showed you that Lattice processor in that. So it isolates the I squared S signal. That's really kind of what it's doing in this particular device, and it's kind of reshaping that and reducing jitter and all of that other stuff. So you have the cleanest I squared S signal to work with internally, because that's what this works with internally. That's what DACs work with internally. So the jitter is low as 38 femtoseconds. It's really, really low. That's way at the bottom of jitter measurements. So really the things it does is it improves bass quality is much better, and I'll talk about that. And it brings out a much more natural sound, and it adds things that all of us audiophiles crave, and that is imaging cues and things like that. So we're going to talk about that. Offers a ton of sonic benefits. It improves the quality of the digital signal before it ever gets to your DAC. So again, your DAC is not working as hard. Much lower jitter, so now the DAC doesn't have to really deal with much jitter. The high quality clocks and reclocking circuits reduce timing errors, and it leads to an improvement in clarity and transients, and this is the important thing, and imaging. And honestly, that's where you're going to hear the benefit of a DDC reclocker most is in it will be in bass response, but really more in imaging. So you get a much cleaner background. The noise floor is much lower. That means that all the subtle nuances, all the small little audio cues that we look for as audiophiles to sense room size and space and imaging and instrument position and all that other stuff, it's just much better resolved because the background is so dark that all those little micro details get to come out. This will also improve the dynamics. Now again, because the DAC isn't dealing with all this additional noise and jitter and everything else, it can actually, it's getting a super clean signal in with the full dynamic range available, and it can then reproduce that. So you get tighter bass, you get better spatial definition. And again, like I said, most of this is going to be in the imaging side of things. So again, the soundstage, when you put a DDC in line with a good DAC, the soundstage gets much larger, much better defined, much easier to listen deeply into. I have found that really the biggest, or one of the easiest ways for me to determine what that improvement in soundstage and imaging is in a complex, let's say an orchestral crescendo, where we've got 20 or 30 instruments playing all at the same time. It is easier to go in and listen to a specific instrument and follow that specific instrument. Let's say we're listening to a rock song or something like that, and you want to just kind of focus in on what the bass player is doing. Well, you can, even though the electric guitars are screaming away and the keyboardist is banging away on his keyboards, the ability to pull out that individual instrument and be able to follow that instrument through the mix is really, it's much more accentuated and much better defined when you have a good DDC reclocker in the line. So what it really does is this cleans everything up so that your DAC can perform at its optimum. I mean, it's kind of like cleaning the air filter, changing the oil, changing the spark plugs and everything in your car. It's going to run more efficiently. It's going to have a little better performance. It's going to just be more satisfying overall. That's really what this does. So I know you guys are going to ask about how I used it. So let me just reconfigure for a second and we'll talk about the ways I used it and the equipment I plugged it into. Well, by now most of my regular viewers will know what my kind of normal testing regimen is. I usually, when it comes to something like this, in and of itself, you're not listening directly to this. You're listening to the results of this. So I used it in my normal reference system, which of course consists of the A12 Advanced Pairs A12 Classic. I also used it with the Black Ice F22. I used it with the Electro Compagnie unit I just reviewed. I used it with the Vincent SV500 MK. I used it with the Unison Research S6 Black. And because the S6 Black has its own DAC in it, the A12 Classic has its own DAC in it, and I used it with those. Primarily though, my source was, or this plugged into the Live Harmony, the Live Micro DAC, the Gishelli J2S, Shanling SM 1.3 streamer, a bunch of other stuff. But I wanted to kind of test it to see at what level was I going to start to hear an improvement. And so, you know, here's the deal. On the Gishelli J2S, that thing sounds wonderful. I do have, Gino redesigned the USB board on that, so it sounds pretty good on its own. Did this yield a benefit? Yes, but was it enough of a benefit to justify spending $500 to plug into basically at its regular entry-level price of $250 DAC? I don't know that it's worth that. Is it worth putting a DDC reclocker on a Gishelli DAC? Absolutely, but maybe look at the Duke Audio U2 Pro or XU2 Pro. I'll put the model number down here. I think that'll be available soon. Or an SMSL, you know, that would be PO100 Pro. Yes, that's worth it. Same with like the Fozzy ZD3. So let me go back a second. My Gishelli J2S has Burson Vivid op amps in it, so it sounds really good on its own. There wasn't enough of a huge improvement in sound plugging the Gishelli into this that could justify the price of this. Same with the Fozzy ZD3, which is running the Burson V7 Classic op amps in it. Again, there was an improvement, but it wasn't enough of improvement to justify spending $500 to add to basically what's a $160 DAC. I don't think so. $70 SMSL piece, or I don't know what the price of the Duke piece is, it's going to be under $100. Yeah, that's worth it at that point. Now, I did plug this in and I used it with the built-in DAC in the Advanced Pairs A12 Classic. It has a remarkable Burr Brown DAC in it. It's really, really good. Yes, there was a big benefit. There was noticeably improved soundstage, much better, much cleaner, much tighter presentation overall. Can I justify the $500 expense for the DDC reclocker with the A12 Classic? Yeah, at $4,000, yeah, that makes sense for sure. So yeah, I would recommend that. So I also used this with the built-in DAC in the Unison Research S6 Black Edition, and was that worth it? Yeah, that was worth it too. That's a very good high-end tube amp with a really good quality built-in DAC. Yes, that made it much nicer, much cleaner, much tighter. Again, imaging, the biggest benefit I got from using this on whatever it was I plugged it into was an improved soundstage a lot. Now, here's where it got really interesting. I plugged the Shanling ET3 CD transport into this, and it worked marvelously because I can go out USB on the Shanling, come in USB on this, and then go out I2S to whichever DAC I'm plugged into, or SPDIF, depending on the DAC. In those cases, I was going out to the Live Harmony. Man alive, some of those CDs, I've been listening to some of these things for 30 years. The clarity and the resolution and the ability to, again, get that soundstage, that space, that just the micro detail, the fine little nuances that I crave to, you know, help me determine imaging and room size and instrument tone and the texture and, you know, feeling the fact that there's a human being playing that violin, you know, those kinds of things. That's really important to me. And that was a great combination. That is a great way to use one of these, is on a CD transport like that, you know, if you're not streaming. Now, I also have in-house the Matrix X SPDIF 3, which is a very similar $500 box as this, and I will talk about that when I do the review of the Matrix, which will be coming up very, very shortly. And there are more similarities than there are differences. So in all of this, the one thing to keep in mind is there's no best. Honestly, there's no best. There may be best for you, and that's based on your opinion and preferences and so forth. There may be best for me, again, based on my opinion or preferences. So if I'm comparing this to the micro DDC from Live, the micro DDC is maybe just a little bit more refined. It's certainly, I think, worth the extra 350 bucks. You know, 850 bucks versus 500. And how about the Matrix X SPDIF? They're so close to being nearly a tie. And again, I'll talk about that more when I get into the Matrix unit. One of the things I like about the Matrix unit is its physical size. And again, when I review that, we'll talk about that in depth. So I highly recommend DDC reclockers, especially if you find the performance at 500 bucks like this gives, and it's remarkable how good the performance on this thing is. I was really, really impressed with it. I was really impressed with it too when I used it with the Gustard X26 Model 3 that I just recently reviewed. That was a great combination. So this is well worth, to me, this is well worth the 500 bucks. Absolutely. It just improved the sound enough to justify the cost, especially if you're using a good quality DAC. I think if you have a DAC that's, you know, upwards of $750,000 or up into the $1,000 more price range, yeah, you might want to consider one of these. It was really, really rewarding to listen to. So anyway, that's the Gustard U18 USB Interface DDC reclocker, and that's really, those are all my thoughts about it. Highly recommended, really highly recommended. Well, again, a shout out to Aoshida Audio for providing this product for me to review. There will be a link in the pinned comment and in the video description to the product page on Aoshida's website for this product. It is not an affiliate link, just to be clear. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you'd be willing to give me your like and your subscription. Thank you guys so much to my members and my subscribers and my viewers. Thank you for everything. You guys amaze me all the time. Anyway, there will be a membership link in the pinned comment and the video description. There are some affiliate links in the video description. You guys know the drill on that. There's no music in this particular review because, again, this is being connected to a DAC, and if I reviewed the DAC, I'll refer you to the music selections that were in that video. Now, it must be said, when I review a DAC, I don't have this in the chain for all of my reviewing conclusions and everything else. So when I give you the review, it's just the DAC, not this. But I did connect this to a lot of different DACs because I wanted to hear the improvement this would make across a broad range of products, and that's that. So anyway, comment, let me know what your thoughts are. Where are you at on DDC reclockers? What, you know, what do you, they do work. Believe me, they do work. Anyway, I think that's everything I need to say. Please like, subscribe, comment. You can follow me on Instagram. My name is Ed Holmwood. This is the Old Guy Hi-Fi channel, and it's now your obligation to yourself, as I always say, to put on some beautiful music, maybe going through a cool little reclocker like this Gustard unit. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your day. Thanks so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day.